much. And thanks for that nice introduction, Mr. Mayor. Thanks to all of you for coming out. It's a beautiful August day. You have lots of things that you could do with your day, so it's an honor to have you here with me. I want to talk to you briefly about an issue that I think all Americans ought to be concerned about, and then we'll open up to questions and take as many as I can. If we're able to get your question today, great. If we're not, I've got staff here who can help me process those in writing after I have to get off to my next meeting. I'm going to open by talking about how blessed we are to live in a country where we have a government that aspires to be one of and by and for the people. What that means is that you have the ability to elect people who make your laws. When we talk about the Constitution, very often we think of, in the first instance, we think of our rights under the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, skipped over the Third because we don't see a lot of quartering of troops in people's homes these days, and so they don't worry as much about the Third Amendment. We think about the thou shalt nots of the Constitution, those found in the Bill of Rights. This is appropriate because there are things government shouldn't do. It shouldn't ever subject you to cruel and unusual punishment, which would violate the Eighth Amendment, for example. But all of those protections really are dependent upon and downstream from the core structural protections of the Constitution. By that, I mean the vertical protection that we call federalism, and the horizontal protection, which we call separation of powers. Federalism, implicit in the original text of the Constitution, makes clear that most of the power in our system is supposed to reside at the state and local level, close to the people. The federal government's in charge of national defense, weights and measures, trademarks, copyrights and patents, bankruptcy laws, immigration laws, regulating interstate and foreign commerce or trade, and declaring war, a few other things, but mostly things that the founding fathers decided the states could not do and still have this be a cohesive nation. Everything else reserved to the states. Most laws that govern your day-to-day interaction with your fellow beings. Laws that govern what happens to you if you breach a contract, or if you steal, if you kidnap, or you defame someone. Most of those are governed by state law, not federal law. That's the vertical protection, we call that federalism. The horizontal protection, we call it separation of powers. It says within our limited federal government, we're going to have one branch, Congress, the legislative branch, that makes the laws. Another branch headed by the president that enforces the laws. A third branch headed by the Supreme Court that interprets the laws, resolving disputes between different people who interpret the law differently. When each level of government stays within its sphere and each branch of government stays within its lane, we have liberty and we benefit from it. Those structural protections, I say, are upstream from our Bill of Rights protections, the thou shalt not protections, for one simple reason. Any dictatorial government anywhere in the world can have a Bill of Rights, and most of them do. A lot of them look like our Bill of Rights, sometimes equaling, if not exceeding ours, in terms of the degree to which individual liberties are protected. But whether or not a Bill of Rights is worth more than the paper on which it's printed has everything to do with whether that system of government has protections in it to protect the people against the dangerous accumulation of power in the hands of the few. That's why we have the vertical protection of federalism and the horizontal protection of separation of powers. We've drifted from these gradually, steadily over the last 80 years to the point now where we've almost inverted the pyramid structure, broad base of power at the state and local level, narrow base at the top. We've almost turned it upside down in some respects. As that has happened since the 1930s, and this has happened under the leadership of houses of representatives, of senates, and of White Houses of every conceivable partisan combination. Both parties have been consistent offenders here. We have also distorted and deviated from the separation of powers. You see, what happened was Congress, starting in the 1930s, got all this additional power. In addition to being in charge of national defense and immigration and things like that, it now found itself in charge of labor, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, health, safety, and welfare. Members of Congress panicked, understandably thinking, gosh, every time we pass a law, we make one group of people happy, another group of people very unhappy. We'll have a lot of more people mad at us. So Congress got in the habit of, in many instances, delegating lawmaking power Instead of making the actual law, Congress would sort of pass a platitude. We shall have good law in area X. And we hereby delegate to commission or department or agency Y the power to make and enforce law. It happens all over the place. One of the early examples of this was the Agricultural Adjustment Act, passed in 1938. It promised to set prices, to keep crop prices stable, and gave discretion to unelected bureaucrats in the Department of Agriculture, the power to limit crop production. It resulted in the fining of farmers who grew too much wheat or corn or soybeans. The problem was Congress wasn't even making these laws. It was instead bureaucrats. When people are harmed by those laws, you can't fire the unelected bureaucrat. You can fire your senator every 6 years. You can fire every representative every 2 years. You cannot, as a voter, fire a federal bureaucrat. We've given them the protection historically reserved for despots and tyrants. They make the law, you have to comply with it. A violation of that law might send you to prison. It might result in substantial fines. It might destroy your business or your livelihood. You have to comply. Not a lot you can do about it. Fortunately, there is a solution to a lot of this. A solution that is found in a legislative proposal called the REINS Act. REINS is the acronym. Stands for Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. Its message is simple. It says that for any of these major rules, rules that come out of an executive branch agency, not just deciding what time the lights go on or off in a particular government office, but affecting your material rights, the way you run your business or live your life, subjecting you to the risk of imprisonment or fines or something else. Those rules would have to be approved by Congress. They'd have to be passed by Congress, like any other law. You see, it's important to remember that the very first operative provision of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1, says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Article 1, Section 7 then fills in the gaps and explains how you do this. You have to have the same legislative text passed in both houses of Congress, identical language. Then it's presented to the president, who can sign it, veto, or acquiesce to it. It's the only way you can make a federal law. We've been ignoring that for over 80 years. The REINS Act would help to restore that. This is not cost-free. Costs American consumers between $2 and $3 trillion every year. These are costs not borne by billionaires or corporate fat cats, but by you and me, ordinary people, who find that everything they buy is more expensive because of those regulatory compliance costs. We're talking about a sum of money roughly comparable to what you pay in income tax every single year. Laws made not by people you elect, but by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. Good people, hardworking people, highly specialized people with a lot of information, but they don't work for you, and that's a big problem. So if you agree with me, I'd love to have you talk to your friends and your neighbors about the REINS Act. We need the REINS Act to be passed. This is not an issue that's either distinctively Republican or Democratic, either liberal or conservative. It's simply an American issue. It's a constitutional issue, and it's an issue that has a profound effect on the economy. On that happy note, let's open it up to questions. We can talk about law, politics, gardening, religion, relationships, rock music lyrics from the 70s and 80s, or whatever you want. My friend Justin is going to circulate the mic.
Yes, my name is Nick Franklin. I'm wondering if what we're doing to curtail the digital currency that the president has authorized through, I think it's Executive Order 14067, that has the potential for totally disrupting our lives and destroying the wealth that we've accumulated.
Yeah, that's going to happen over my dead body. I will fight that at every turn. So here's why. Look, if we adopt a central bank digital currency, it'll be the end, not only of sound money, what's left of sound money. It'll be the end of the Fourth Amendment. It'll be the end of the Fifth Amendment. They'll be able to use your currency, your financial transactions, to track everything you do, and with it to regulate your life. If you want to live in China, you move to China. You want to live like the Chinese people have to live. You have to acknowledge that that's what you want, because that's what this would do. It's a terrible idea. That's why I've introduced legislation, the first of its kind in the Senate, called the No CBDC Act, No Central Bank Digital Currency Act. Yeah, the No CBDC Act, should it pass, would stop it altogether. Now, they don't have the power to do this by executive action on their own. They believe they do. They want the Federal Reserve to carry forward this concept and the Federal Reserve to put it in place. The Federal Reserve, according to many accounts, is doing pilot program testing on what they could do. I don't believe they have the power, but out of an abundance of caution, I've introduced that bill.
I'm a Utah native of nearly 80 years, military veteran, retired professor, and businessman. I have lived in Salt Lake City, Sandy, Lehi. In October of 2020, you stated your allegiance and respect for Donald Trump by comparing him to one of your heroes in the Book of Mormon, Alma, chapters 43 through 56.
It's actually chapter 60, but that's okay.
Captain Morona. You stated was like Donald Trump, a great leader worthy of being our president. Are you prepared today to defend your allegiance to Donald Trump and want him to be our next president? If so, how can you defend his dishonest, obscene, criminal actions during his entire life? If you're not in favor of Donald Trump, why have you not denounced him publicly? Why have you not voted for his removal from office? How can you reasonably give your respect and allegiance to a man without any honorable regard for moral ideas or use of his power?
Yeah, look, since January 20th, 2021, the day Joe Biden took office, the average Utah family has been incurring $1,000 of additional monthly living expenses every single month. Month after month. Yeah, I'm getting there, ma'am. Month after month, they've been incurring that. So yes, do I wish Donald Trump were still president of the United States? Absolutely, without question. I haven't endorsed any presidential candidate. As a U.S. Senator, I always have several colleagues running, and so I don't typically make endorsements in presidential races until well into the presidential election year in question. But I wish he were still president, and if he gets elected president again, that'd be good for America. America has suffered enough under Joe Biden.
Senator Lee, thank you for coming to be with us. We love you, and we think that you are a chosen person at this very time, and we fully support you. I have several things I want to say. It has been brought to my attention that there is a Senate Bill 686. We know that you can't do everything, and there's about 25 issues I'd like to bring up with you, but I'm going to bring up one thing that I know you can specialize in. This is the Restrict Act, otherwise known as the TikTok Act. And it is reported to be 100 times more tyrannical than the Patriot Act. It will take away our rights, it will take away many things that we hold dear, and it will completely pave the way for globalism to destroy America. I sent you a message through Robert Axon on the 31st of March, by text message, with a video clip of a gentleman named Josh Reed, who gives a wonderful synopsis of this. Just wanted to know if you received that.
I get a lot of things on the Restrict Act, and this is the one sponsored by Senator Warner from Virginia, right? I just want to make sure we've got multiple TikTok bills.
Is on there. It's a bipartisan.
Yeah.
But it's not good.
Yeah, I believe I got that one. I've gotten a lot like them, so I want to make sure that it's the same one we're talking about. Yeah, I oppose that bill. I oppose it strongly for a number of reasons. Number one, it doesn't do what it purports to do. It claims that it's going to hold TikTok accountable and make TikTok somehow illegal, and it's problematic in a number of respects. Number one, it doesn't do that. Number two, it's addressing the wrong problem. Number three, it sets a precedent that the government can just shut down a business that it doesn't like. And then there are a lot of other technical ramifications they would have that I think would be dangerous. There are reasons to be concerned about TikTok. TikTok being owned by the holding company, I believe it's called ByteDance, which is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And it has a system within it that's able to collect all kinds of information on Americans. It's like a massive surveillance tool for the Chinese Communist Party, which has the ability through ByteDance, through TikTok, to scrape all kinds of personal information from the American people and make it available to whoever wants to have it within the Chinese Communist Party. So there are legitimate concerns for it. That bill doesn't fix the problem and creates others. So yeah, I oppose it.
Senator Lee, I'm a currently serving member of the Utah Air National Guard.
Thanks for your service.
I volunteered for until 2018, and I realized at that time that I was violating my oath to the Constitution by deploying unconstitutionally. And that's a big concern for me. I want to defend my country, but I don't want these unelected bureaucrats at the Pentagon, without accountability, sending us to war. There's an effort, state by state, it's called Defend the Guard, that would, I don't know if it's the right solution to this, but until Congress does its job, we're going to keep doing this. And so Defend the Guard is an action by each state that would prevent its National Guard from deploying unless Congress declares it. And I think that's a really good thing. When I talk to lawmakers in Utah, they're all afraid the Pentagon will cut funding, defund the Guard, which I think is a valid threat. I think the Pentagon will do that given the chance. They'd rather defund the Guard than, follow the Constitution.
Yep.
Will you, as a senator, fight to prevent them from defunding the Guard? I've been told that Congress can't do anything. You just give money to the Pentagon, and they decide who gets it. That seems wrong.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, and thanks for your service. Short answer to your question is not familiar with the particular strategy they've got in mind, but I agree with you. Under no circumstances should Congress ever allow the Guard to be defunded. Look, our best warfighters come from the National Guard, particularly the Utah National Guard. You all who serve in the Utah National Guard punch way above your weight. Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, you guys produce far more for the American people than any other unit of the U.S. military that I know anything about. And so thank you for your service. You are right to be concerned about Congress declaring war. It's been something that I've been consistent on, and it's been something I've taken some heat for, and also something that's helped me build a lot of really good bipartisan relationships. There's a great photo of me and Bernie Sanders in a full-on embrace in the Washington Post a few months ago, because he and I both agree there's a problem with sending people off to war without declaring war. One of the great things about Bernie Sanders and I have had more success with the War Powers resolution than anyone in the nearly 50-year history of that legislation in pushing back against instances where we're getting pulled into wars. We have been fighting, for example, effectively fighting in a war in Yemen, a civil war in Yemen that is not ours to fight. No declaration of war, no authorization for the use of military force, no tangible benefit to the American people unless you add inference upon inference over and over again to do that. And so, yeah, I think this is important. Bernie Sanders likes to quote Federalist 69, in which, and I can't quote it quite as great as he can because it's with a Brooklyn accent, it sounds much better. He points out that Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 69 differentiates between our system and our former national government, the one that was based in London. Really, our government still is, we pride ourselves on our constitutional system as unique, and it is in many ways, but it's also predicated in many material respects on what England had prior to the Revolution. Hamilton points out in there that the requirement that Congress declare war was a sharp break from the model we had with England, where the monarch could take the country to war. It was then Parliament's job to figure out how to pay for it. But the monarch, their chief executive, had the exclusive power to take them to war. He explains why that was a bad idea, why we adopted our system, where the people's elected lawmakers, who were, again, it's the branch of government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals. It's also important for the same reasons I was talking about in connection with the REINS Act. We have the most dangerous power among the three branches of government in the legislative branch, including the power to declare war. And that's there for a reason. When we're putting your life on the line, we're putting American blood and treasure on the line to fight wars, we owe it to you. And we owe it to the entire country to do it right. So thank you for raising that issue.
Senator Lee, I'm a resident of Pleasant Grove, and I reached out to your office to try to receive some help. I'm dealing with an agency of the United States that I feel is a judge, a jury, and an executioner. And I'm referring to the IRS.
Everybody's favorite agency, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, we need some help. A tax dispute has escalated into over $1 million of fees and penalties. And a accusation from the agency that I committed fraud when in actuality they were unable to substantiate it. The frustration is if you feel the need to dispute, there's no accountability or you're not able to hold the feet to the fire of the agency, and it's wrong. And all these other things that we talk about, in my opinion, this is a basic frustration that many citizens of the United States we don't have any control over the governing agency, and we need some help.
You're right to raise that under the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Before the federal government deprives you of life, liberty, or property, it has to afford you due process of law. And from what you're describing, it sounds like you feel like you've been deprived of your opportunity to make your case. That's a problem. I've got Jessica Christopher here in the back of the room. She heads my casework team in my Salt Lake office. If you will, before you leave today, connect with her and we'll figure out how we can be of help. Thanks.
Hi, Senator Lee. I'm Marina Cutler, and I just wanted to ask you about the Afghan Adjustment Act. I've met with your office several times about it and would love to hear from you. Why have you chosen not to support it in support of our veterans and the sacrifices they made in Afghanistan? I know that there have been security concerns in the past. Those have been addressed by rewriting the language of the bill, and would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, okay, so the Afghan Adjustment Act, to my knowledge, those have not been resolved. I know there have been multiple iterations. Unless you're aware of a newer iteration than I am, I still have concerns about the screening and the ability to make sure that who comes in here happens to be who he or she claims to be. We have good reason to be concerned for this. We don't want to set up any situation. We want to make sure, number one, that those who helped us materially in Afghanistan, who don't raise red flags with their background, have a way to get here, as many already have, because they helped us materially, and that's what we do as a country to those who help us and those who will be subjected to a risk of harm, of threats, of violence, or even death, based on their help of us. But we want to do that. Now, we have tools already outside of the Afghan Adjustment Act to make that possible. And through those tools, we can do and already are providing access to the United States. The Afghan Adjustment Act would open that up further and potentially restrict our ability to make sure that the people are who they say they are when they get here. Yeah, I understand that that is your position, and I know that there is vetting that goes on. My concern is that the Afghan Adjustment Act, as written, makes those existing protections. Again, we already have the statutory authority to do this. We already are bringing people in to do it. This threatens to change those standards. What we don't want to do is open up the country to people who are not who they claim to be. That's my concern. I will take another look at it. Perhaps they've rewritten it since I've seen it last. And if I'm satisfied, I'm happy to support it.
Hello, thank you. My name is Carol Barnett, and I want to raise something with you regarding the drug war that we have. You know, people are dying, that's going up, but prescription drug has gone down. I'm a pain patient, a chronic pain patient. I can't get pain meds because my doctor's too afraid that the DEA is going to come after him to prescribe them for me. The vet will give my dog pain meds because he could get addicted.
Your dog.
My dog,
Well,
yes, my dog. That's what I told him. But my poor baby was in pain all night long because he couldn't get pain meds, right? They wouldn't give them to him. There's something called the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program that monitors all of us. The state of Utah does it. Every state in the union has it. They monitor our drugs. They monitor what we're getting. They give us rating scores. They give doctors rating scores. I'm sorry, I had cancer, and I was told for mastectomy, only Tylenol after mastectomy. I mean, come on. You know, that's ridiculous. It's gone too far. I mean, who's dying are people who are getting illegal fentanyl. Fentanyl's good. We need fentanyl. We want to have fentanyl for surgeries. It's important. Regular prescription drugs are important to us. People can't get their other medicine. There's shortages on all sorts of drugs right now. And the DEA has just gone too far. They're criminalizing pain patients. They're criminalizing doctors. And it's really got to stop because we're all one accident away, or one surgery away, of needing pain medication. We need pain meds. And it's just not true that you can take one oxycodone and you're going to be addicted. That doesn't happen. It may happen on Netflix, but in real life it doesn't happen.
Thanks for sharing that. This is of concern. I had not heard that about the veterinary implications. That has a new ripple to it. I have heard a lot of what you're saying from a lot of constituents, people throughout the state who have experienced this. And someone who has gone through a surgery as significant as a mastectomy, you're saying you were told Tylenol was the strongest thing. They couldn't prescribe anything stronger than that in response to that.
I ended up going to California and I had a procedure called cryoablation, which froze the tumor. I was in the office, they did local anesthesia. The next day, I'm in Santa Monica Pier having lunch. I didn't need a mastectomy. So, and I got the insurance to pay for it. So there's other options that can be done for major surgeries,
but there are other people who don't have those options.
they don't have those options.
Yeah.
They don't have the resources that I do to go and find. I've spent over $100,000 on all sorts of things to manage my neuropathy. And right now, I just need regular pain meds.
Right.
That's what I need. I've done all the other stuff.
No, it's tragic, and it's always troubling whenever you see government criminalizing lawful conduct, trying to make criminals out of law-abiding people. This is the kind of thing that can happen with any government. Governments do tend to expand their power over time. It's almost a law of nature, like gravity. But that's where elections are supposed to come in handy, because if they go too far, you can push back on them. It's also one of the reasons why laws like that, not any good reason why the practice of medicine should be regulated as much as it is from Washington, D.C. Different states are going to experiment with different things designed to deal with the preferences and the conditions on the ground in those states. We're a very diverse country. We have been really since the founding of our country, with regional preferences and needs and crises that people were dealing with. So to try to come up with a national standard, especially a national standard by regulatory edict from unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats within the DEA or otherwise, is dangerous. So thank you for sharing that with me. I will continue to look for ways to push back on that, because at the same time when we're criminalizing the conduct, lawful conduct on the part of doctors and patients, people who are suffering and need that care, we've got a government that in many respects turns a blind eye to the fact that enough fentanyl came into the country illegally last year across our southern border to kill 110,000 Americans. And this is the introduction of a toxic substance. So you can almost compare it to a weapon of mass destruction that has killed 110,000 Americans. And we ought to be focused on that more than we focus on threatening someone who's just had a major surgery with their inability to have their pain treated in a lawful manner.
Thank you, Mike, for your love for America and the love for the Constitution. We appreciate your passion and your fight for the right. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I appreciate associating with you when I was working for President Trump a couple years ago back east. I'm an elected state and county delegate, precinct chairman. But I have a question. It's probably fairly easy. I'm just interested in your opinion constitutionally, because I know you're an expert on the Constitution.
Not an expert, just a guy who reads it.
There you go.
Don't leave home without it.
I have a city that continually is sending me warnings and citations for the grass on my hall, and they just sent me a warning. My vehicle was expired, the registration, in a couple days. I said, Mike, were you guys camping in my yard? You see that? It's a couple days. And they warned me about some weeds in the back. That's county property. Oh, we don't care. You clean it up anyway, we're going to cite you. But the main thing that I think...
Wait, they were warning you about property that was not yours?
Correct. And I
That's
met
weird.
4 years ago to show them that's county property. And I met with the county, told me to sell it to me cheap, or I'm going to start sending citations to you. And they said, we don't care, we'll cite you anyway. They seem like they go a little bit overboard on some of these things. The one that concerns me, when they decide my house is vacant, by whatever the definitions are, they want $100 a month. And if I don't pay the $100 a month for having it vacant, they're going to cite me, and they've done so, $125 or $250 a month citation because they didn't pay $100 a month. I have clothes there, I have electricity there, I'm not there all the time. Sometimes I'm in Ukraine. I've been over to helping with the refugees for months. I'm heading over there in a few weeks again. And I'm not always there. I'm sometimes in southern Utah at my parents' place. And so they make rules. If in their opinion it's vacant, I have to pay them $100 every month. It doesn't seem right. It seems like an illegal tax that seems unconstitutional and taking my property away from me. Money.
Yeah.
So I know you may not be able to do anything, but I'd like your opinion at least on that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got no authority in this area, but I'll offer my opinion here. Number one, if I were you, so is this the city or the county?
It's the city.
What city?
Ogden.
I would ask them, you ought to give them a call and ask them to cite their statutory authority to do it. What state law or county ordinance it is that gives them the authority to issue this citation. In particular, the citation for having a vacant home, that's creepy. I don't know how, that also leads to another question of how they enforce that. There are some laws that are themselves not necessarily unconstitutional, but that could be enforced only by unconstitutional means. If they got some spooky guy sitting there looking into your windows to figure out whether you're there, I mean, that's kind of creepy.
Well, recently I told them to stay off my property without a court order, a court search order.
Yeah.
I'm going to put signs up if you need. I think, is that significant enough to tell them to stay off my property?
Well, generally, yes. Some of it depends on what they're doing and where they're standing. If they're on the sidewalk, that's deemed within the curtilage. They can go there. But yeah, if you haven't allowed them onto your property, if you've told them certain areas of property are off limits to them, they shouldn't do that without an order.
one thing, maybe in their definition, I don't have water turned on there. I called there to turn it on. It's $100 to turn it on. I said, how much water do I get? Well, none. That's just for the privilege of being connected. So basically, it's $100 here, there, or somewhere. I have to pay them every month.
Yeah, that part's not unconstitutional. That's just goofy. By the way, if you don't have your water turned on, that's probably why they're charging you the vacancy
They
rate.
never said that until just this last week.
Interesting.
They
Yeah.
never knew that.
That's weird. Yeah, most of that stuff probably not unconstitutional, but goofy and ought to be concerning to your fellow Ogden residents. So.
Senator Lee, thanks for being here. My name is Dan Sims. I'm from Highland, retired from the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. That's, yeah, not the other BLM.
Right.
33 years.
Right.
As a firefighter and a forester, trying to preserve our natural resources, and I'm a veteran of the Vietnam era. Really quick, I'm extremely disappointed with Harris and Mayorkas regarding the gross lack of management of our southern border. I think anything's ever going to change, and I assume that you folks in Congress have the ability to manage our taxpayers' money wisely, try to prevent wasteful spending, yet it seems we're going to spend ourselves into oblivion. Is there anything we can do to change that? Or let it change?
Yeah. All right. Great questions on both points. First, as to the southern border, yeah, I share your concern there. This is unprecedented. We've always struggled a bit. We've got a very long southern border. We're talking about a couple thousand miles roughly, and it can be difficult to control. We've had fits and starts at securing it better. We've had periods of time when there have been large waves of illegal immigration, but nothing even close to what we've had in the last couple of years. Nothing even close to it. We're talking about millions of people who have poured in illegally. It starts to feel rather different than past waves. One of the tragedies of this is that in allowing this and perpetuating, or allowing and perpetuating the abuse, the human rights abuses that occur along with it for basically every one of those millions of people who have come in illegally, they're being human trafficked. This is human trafficking operation. These global transnational criminal organizations, including and especially the Mexican drug cartels, have been very enterprising. These guys make a lot of money. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars a year in all their criminal endeavors. In some instances, where a single cartel can do that. And they've discovered they can supplement their income while facilitating their drug trafficking by introducing human trafficking into the mix. So for every one of those millions of people who are coming over, for each one of those people, some cartel is making $2, $3, $4, sometimes $10,000 or $12,000 per person, depending on where they're coming from, their age, and some other factors. And they're mistreated. It's estimated that among the women and girls who were brought up at that, a lowball estimate puts it at 30%. Some of the higher estimates put it at 65, 66%, have been subjected to sexual assault. A lot of them are commandeered into human sex traffic, to the sex trafficking industry longer term after they get here. It is tragic in every way, and it's tragic to those people who are already impoverished, who are giving everything they have, selling everything they've got, and sometimes extorted even after they've made the journey to pay even more. And so it's got to be brought to a stop. I serve on the Judiciary Committee. We routinely have oversight hearings with Secretary Mayorkas. I talk to him on a regular basis, and I've asked him repeatedly, you've got to address this. One of the features of this that people may not be grasping is that the way they're doing it this time, it's perpetuating all of this illegal traffic across the border, which, by the way, is contributing to the fentanyl coming across the border, because they can hand packages to these people who can then bring it in. That's part of how we got enough fentanyl brought into the country last year alone to kill 110,000 Americans. I mean, that did kill Americans. They brought in enough to kill many more than that. They're brought in under the auspices of our asylum laws. Our asylum laws are in place for a good reason. And they're there to make sure that people who come from places where there's oppression and persecution, to make sure that they have a place to come to in America. We want that. We've long welcomed that in this country. But the problem is, nearly every one of those people coming across illegally are claiming asylum, but 95% plus of them are not eligible for asylum and will never be deemed eligible for asylum. The way the law is written, I believe the most natural, correct reading of the law is that if you you cross our southern border and claim asylum without papers, without prior grant of asylum, you're supposed to be detained until such time as your eligibility for asylum has been adjudicated and found meritorious. Well, they've been doing that, but then as soon as they run out of bed space at an ICE detention facility, they've just been letting them in. I believe the more correct interpretation of the law is once the bed space is full, they should send people back if they come across on land without papers, without having been deemed eligible for asylum. What they're telling them is, you will at some point, when they release them from the ICE detention facility, you will at some point have an immigration hearing scheduled. When that happens, we hope that you will appear at your hearing. We now release you. And they go to wherever they're going to go. We lose track of them, and we'll never see most of those people again in the immigration proceeding. This then sends the signal to the drug cartels who are making billions and billions of dollars monthly on this stuff, that this is cool. We can still do it. We can make more money, and that's why it's continued to escalate. I've called on Secretary Mayorkas repeatedly. You've got to start enforcing this law, and if you're not willing to do it, you need to either step down and find somebody else who's willing to do it, or do it on your own. He still hasn't done it. This is where it gets really tough. No matter what our laws say, if you don't have an executive willing to enforce the laws that we have, and who seems in some ways eager to at least allow that law to be thwarted. You know, if President Biden were here, he would say, well, I've got discretion to do it this way. I disagree with him on that, but even if I were to indulge the fiction that he's on solid legal footing there, he still has an obligation to not interpret the law in a way that results in the law being completely ignored. And that's why ultimately we have to rely on elections to make this happen. I wish we didn't have to wait that long. I wish we could rely on them just enforcing the law, but that's where he's put us. As to the spending issue, look, this is a simple problem with a simple solution. In this country, we've been electing people who will vote for any spending bill, literally any spending bill, even a spending bill that spends $1 trillion, $2 trillion more than we can bring in. And sadly, it's been Republicans and Democrats alike who have been doing it. The spending bills come forward always at the end of a spending period when Armageddon is being foretold, and they wait. The law firm of McConnell, Schumer, and McCarthy and Jeffries wait until the last minute, and then they come forward with this bill that the four of them have negotiated in secret. Nobody's read, 2,000 or 3,000 pages long, spends more than $1,000 more than we have to spend, and then members are told, you've either got to vote for this or you'll be blamed for a government shutdown. Most of them vote for it and then beat their chest and saying, I did this for the troops, aren't I great? Those people need to lose elections if we're ever going to get that under control. Thank you.
So my name is Brandon Armstrong. I've been living in Utah for 14 years, and actually at the end of this month, I'll be moving back home to where I grew up in Florida. Well, my question comes from a lot of troubling legislation that I've seen popping up across the country, hundreds of bills. Why, I guess, could you explain to me why it is deemed inappropriate to teach gay children, trans children, and otherwise queer children that nothing is wrong with them, like they're not broken? Why is this inappropriate to teach children?
Yeah. Okay, so Brandon, your question relates to state legislation. The federal government has no appropriate role in primary and secondary education.
But the Republican Party does.
Yeah, great. Talk to state lawmakers on that issue. On any particular piece of legislation, there will be a whole bunch of considerations. I know that there are some of these bills that have moved forward because there are parents in many states who are concerned that in their state there's been an inappropriate amount of attention paid to sexual issues generally.
What's sexual about the issues I brought up, though?
Yeah, look, the issues that you brought up, I think most people wouldn't find offensive, and I think those statutes usually deal with something broader than what you described. But again, not a state lawmaker. Take that up with your state lawmakers.
This is also going to be our last question. We're running short on time before our next event.
So Senator Lee, I'm so excited to be here to see you. My name is Beverly Mortensen. I'm a Sandy resident for almost 40 years. And one of my daughters went to law school with you.
Oh, great. Who's that?
Marty Mortensen.
Please tell her hello for me.
Oh, I will.
Fantastic person. Haven't seen her in a long time.
She's happily married with 7 children in Virginia.
Wonderful.
Anyway, yeah. But my question is regards what happened in Pro Utah with Craig Robertson a couple weeks ago, where he died at the hands of, as far as I can see, the FBI. But anyway, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this and what you think about this.
Yeah. So anytime, thank you for raising that. And again, tell your daughter hello for me. Anytime someone dies at the hands of government officials, law enforcement, otherwise, it's of concern and it warrants serious investigation. I don't think any of us can claim to know enough facts about that investigation, about what happened there, to know. An investigation will have to happen, and we'll have the ability to make a judgment on it then. I haven't commented on that one because I know relatively little about it. All I know is what you know, based on what we've been able to read from public reports. I will say this, there were some things about that were unusual. Made me wonder why they decided to, apparently there was a flash grenade that was deployed outside the residence. It was executed early in the morning. It seemed like more force than was usual, but again, I don't know what was in their case file. I don't know what reason they may have had to believe that the person would prove to be a threat to them. Law enforcement officers are taught constantly to find ways to deconflict the zone when they're executing a search warrant or an arrest warrant. They always look for ways to make sure that they're doing so in a manner that's less likely to result in any kind of physical conflict. And so that'll be one of the things I'm looking for is what, if anything, they did on that front to try to avoid the conflict, why exactly it was necessary to execute it at the hour that they did, in the manner that they did, rather than to find some other means of doing it. One concern that I have had from the public reports, it seems highly unusual that they, having killed him, left him laying apparently outside for several hours. That's weird. And of course, I'll also have questions about what precipitated that particular warrant to issue. Had he issued additional threats? I really don't know. But like I say, I know only what has been publicly released on that, and that's very, very little. But obviously, it's of deep concern anytime law enforcement acts in a way that results in the taking of a human life. People have got to be held accountable, and we shouldn't expect anything less. Law enforcement, it's with good reason that for most of our country's history, most law enforcement has been handled at the local level. Most of our law enforcement, most of our police in this country either work directly for someone who is elected regularly by the people, as is the case of a sheriff, or they work for someone else who is, say, a city police chief who is in turn appointed by someone else, let's say a mayor, or a city council, or a combination of the two. And it's been good for the American people generally to have most of their government, including most of their law enforcement, happen at the local level rather than at the national level. We need some federal law enforcement, but there are real advantages that happen when we have local law enforcement doing the bulk of it, because local law enforcement tend to know much more about the neighborhood in question and the individual in question when they go to execute a warrant. And so that's yet another reason why we've got to honor federalism and other limitations on government. Remember also, when people talk about government, they talk about restrictions on government, and they talk about constitutional impediments. And people will say, well, this or that limitation is too great of a burden on government. It makes it too difficult for them to do the job. That is the whole point of having a constitution. It is the only point. The point of having a constitution is to place limits on what government may do, on how it may do it, through whom it may act, and what impediments are there to make sure that it doesn't happen. These are all important things that I think have to be taken into account whenever anyone dies at the hands of federal law enforcement. So my chief of staff's pulling out the baseball bat, warning me with great physical violence to me if I don't get moving on to my next event. But let me just close first by thanking you for coming today. Thanking you for caring enough about this country and about your community to come and express your viewpoints. That matters to me, and whether you agree with me or not, I'm grateful to hear your perspectives on these. I've got staff who can help answer additional questions after I've left today, and hopefully we'll catch you at another event. In the meantime, let me just thank you not only for being here, but for giving me the chance to represent you in Washington. Washington is sometimes a difficult place to be, and yet it's a profound honor to represent Utah, a very special place, a place with a lot of people I love. It's a profound honor to get to represent you in Washington, D.C. Please know that there's not a day that goes by when I'm not grateful to you for giving me this chance. And with that gratitude comes an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I've got to wield power very carefully, because government power can be harmful. It can cause problems for people. That's why we take it seriously. That's why I carry the Constitution with me. It's not a prop. It's there to remind me how things are supposed to be done. Thank you very much.